drums, guitars, and death. They finally got it right.
Yeah.
In 1982, a group of teenagers from Raleigh, North Carolina, formed one of heavy music's most influential bands. From hardcore punk roots to southern-tinged metal, this is the story of Corrosion of Conformity's journey. So I want to let you guys know that I'm so excited to see Foo Fighters with Queens of the Stone Age next summer in my city, which is why I want to give the sponsor of today's video, SeatGeek, a huge shout out. With over 35 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app on the App Store. There's over 70,000 events listed on SeatGeek, including concerts, sports, festivals, and more. Right now, you can get tickets to AC/DC, The Offspring, Weird Al, Foo Fighters, and more. I love using SeatGeek. I just recently purchased my tickets to see Foo Fighters next summer with Queens of the Stone Age opening, and I haven't seen either band live. SeatGeek also has your back. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know you're getting a good deal. So look for the green dots. Green means good, red means bad, plus every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee. With the holiday season just around the corner, give the gift of tickets this year and use code ROCK'n'ROLL10 for 10% off your SeatGeek tickets. That's 10% off your tickets with the promo code ROCK'n'ROLL10. Make sure you click the link in the description box to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek. The birth of the band began with guitarist Woody Weatherman and drummer Reed Mullen, who met in the 5th or 6th grade. They were also friends with bassist Mike Dean and a vocalist named Benji Shelton. Before coming up with the moniker Corrosion of Conformity, they went through several names like Barney Fife's Army, The Accused, The 7-Ups, and then, of course, Corrosion of Conformity. The band's name came from drummer Reed Mullen, who told the Greenville News, "I was a punk stuck in Southern high school. There, I was in chemistry class, and we were learning about corrosive substances. It seemed like a cool name for a punk band." The second half of the name came from the DC scene, which was supposedly like high school. Author Stephen Blush added, "They got the DC attitude thrown at them. Who are these redneck, uncool dudes coming to play the ultimate hardcore scene?" The group went through 3 singers in the early days. Shelton was only in the group for about a year. The next singer was Robert Stewart, who was only in the band for 6 weeks. He had this habit of performing with his back to the audience, and then Eric Ike joined the band. In Raleigh, the scene was super tight, and the band used to hold open mic night style parties called the Turner Street Party, where people would get thrown through windows. Ian Mackay of Minor Threat and Fugazi told IndieWeek, "No labels and Corrosion of Conformity were part of the vanguard. What was happening in America in the early 80s was this really profound response to what was coming out of England, like the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Damned. It was all about self-definition. They knew that if they wanted to be a part of something like that, they had better start playing." It just set off. People may have heard about it or read about it, but everywhere it just popped up on its own. The group No Labels also featured Weatherman and Mullen. Mullen came from a well-off family who owned a business. His dad's business was in a building called Players Retreat. The group used to rehearse on the 2nd floor, and the building also had a phone where the members could make long-distance calls for cheap and make connections all over the country, in addition to, of course, booking shows. Unlike a lot of the bands in the area, though, Corrosion of Conformity toured incessantly. Mullen also worked for his dad, so he would take the money he earned and not only help his own band, but he would help other bands make records, and he would promote their shows in addition to getting groups from DC to come to Raleigh as well. The band's early gigs did offend some in their hometown, with news reports being published about how their flyers were resulting in complaints due to scatological and satanic references. The band responded to a Raleigh paper that the flyers were simply done as a joke, but even the local and state government didn't see it as a laughing matter, having Raleigh police detectives and state law alcohol enforcement agents attend some of their gigs. Politics played a huge part in the early part of the band's career all the way to the beginning of the 90s. The band were, after all, growing up during the Cold War, dealing with mutually assured destruction, the Iran-Contra affair, and more domestic issues like police brutality. The band released their first album in 1984, the hardcore punk-influenced Eye for an Eye, which featured vocalist Eric Ike. But the frontman wasn't so much into the political overtones as much as the other members, recalling, "It seemed like I was the only one having fun. Everybody else was so goddamn serious. I'm not against being political or having a stand or voicing your opinion or whatever, but at the same time, it's like, God, man, I'm not going to give myself an ulcer over this shit. Come on, man, party a little bit." Ike wasn't the only one who wasn't happy with the band's first record, as Mullen also shared a similar sentiment. Mullen felt the record didn't capture the sound of the band. It was by 84 or 85 Ike was booted from the group. The band was starting to blend both hardcore and metal music as they started to take a liking to groups like Metallica, Exodus, and Slayer, and they were soon blowing bands off stage. They even played some shows with Slayer, who basically promised them that they'd help them nab a label deal, which they did. Corrosion of Conformity soon inked a contract with Slayer's label Metal Blade a few days later. The band soon shrunk to a three-piece, with Dean and Mullen handling the vocal duties for their follow-up 1985's Animosity. It was the same year the band expanded back to a quartet when they enlisted Ugly Americans member Simon Bob to front the group. Half a year after he joined the group, they recorded the EP Technocracy, but it was apparent it wasn't a good fit. Bob recalled, "In terms of vocals and stuff, I like the more melodic structure to the songs, and I like to sing a little bit more than just the heavy metal deal. In Corrosion, it was just kind of the same thing. They weren't real open to some of the stuff I wanted to do. It was their band, I was a newcomer." As a result, none of the music on the EP was Bob's material, and Bob stayed with the band for about another year and a half, and the group almost had another album worth of material recorded, but Bob left the band before they could go into the studio. The band at this point weren't really happy with Metal Blade's promotion. They moved on with a new singer and lost bassist Mike Dean, who was unhappy with the direction the band was going, with him recalling, "We weren't getting paid $1. We weren't getting any kind of support for Metal Blade, but there was a couple of good songs in Technocracy." The group soon enlisted a friend of theirs from the Raleigh punk scene named Phil Swisher. The band turned their attention to what would be their follow-up album, 1991's Blind. It was a record that saw them go in a far more metal direction. While Mike Dean wasn't on the album, he did discuss the significance of the record, stating, "We were dabbling in metal. We just changed a lot more parts a lot more frequently. When they got up with John Custer and started finally refining the stuff for Blind, that's when something really awesome started happening." The members admitted they were tired of playing the same music and wanted to branch out, feeling that the hardcore scene was growing stale. The band's politics took aim at the military-industrial complex, political corruption, and apathy. Mullen told the Greenville News, "My generation has been cheated. My kids won't be able to breathe clean air or drink clean water or have a proper education, all because our government is in the hands of big business." When Mike Dean left the group, the band, according to Mullen, reached out to both Chris Cornell of Soundgarden after they put out their first album, and they also asked Buzz Osborne from the Melvins to see if they wanted to front the group, but things didn't work out. Pepper Keenan auditioned to front the band, and while he wasn't exactly what they were looking for, they did like his guitar playing, so he joined the group as the second guitar player. He'd previously played in the New Orleans outfit Graveyard Rodeo. Even though they didn't have a singer, the band started writing the songs that eventually made their way onto Blind. Producer John Custer remarked about the band's new chemistry with Keenan in the fold, revealing, "Woody and Pepper worked well together. Good opposing styles. Pepper was more into riff-oriented metal, but Woody could play all that bluesy kind of stuff." Corrosion of Conformity soon put an ad in the Village Voice looking for a singer that was a cross between Ian Gillan, HR from Bad Brains, and Metallica's James Hetfield. Soon enough, Carl Agell saw the ad, auditioned, and got the job in May of '89. Agell, a Swiss national, had previously played in some hardcore bands in New York and Connecticut, including the group School of Violence. With Agell on board, the band had the final piece to complete their next album, Blind. Weatherman told a Raleigh paper about their change in sound, "We're getting away from the screaming thing. We're going for a 70s rock feel. It's not just two chords anymore. We'll still be harsh, but now we'll carry a tune." But the band soon ran into some complications. Keenan ended up breaking his femur and pelvis 2 weeks before the band was scheduled to go into the studio to record Blind. He ended up doing the entire album in a wheelchair while in an enormous amount of pain. One song in particular, though, stood out from the rest of the fold, with Keenan telling Louder Sound, "I wrote a bunch of material for that album, but there was one song that had a different vibe to it. We were tripping out on Ministry's 1989 album, The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste. This thing that was so angry and aggressive, and I got this idea, so the guy said, roll with it. That idea became the band's iconic track, Vote with a Bullet." The song was recorded at the tail end of the sessions, and initially Agell's vocals didn't seem to match the feel of the song, so Keenan stepped up and sang on the track instead, perhaps foreshadowing the band's future. Keenan channeled a lot of his feelings at the time. He was upset at the world. He was seriously injured. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to hospitals, and he was crashing at a friend's house. He added, "It's a battle cry for the disenfranchised youth who are sick of the system. The man in the ivory tower wasn't working for us." The band, ahead of releasing Blind, signed a multi-album deal with Relativity Records. As I mentioned before, politics still proved to be a central part of the band's identity. Tracks on Blind, like Great Purification, is about environmental apocalypse. Painted Smiling Face is about the mass murder of Native Americans. A publication named Native Nations, which is devoted to Indian affairs, even thanked the band after receiving hundreds of calls from their fans interested in helping the organization. Rip Magazine described Blind as a record that Black Sabbath and Public Enemy might make together, while others claimed it was the result of marrying Black Sabbath with Black Flag. But with their change in sound, the band not only caught flack from their longtime fans, but they also got criticized by some in the press for what they claimed was the band's messages calling for violence. Mullen, though, defended the band, telling the New York Times, "To think that a couple of bands and rappers might influence the masses is a little ludicrous." The band not only sang about politics, but they were also very politically active, campaigning for Senator Harvey Gantt in an effort to unseat North Carolina incumbent Senator Jesse Helms in 1990. The band was, however, unsuccessful as Helms retained his Senate seat. Those supporters of Gantt, though, Mullen would help transform them into an organization called North Carolina's Progressive Network, a group whose goals included reproductive rights and free speech. The inner sleeve of Blind also featured organizations that the band supported, including Greenpeace, Amnesty International, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and National Abortion Rights Action League. It also contained the line in their liner notes that read, "Politics is the control of wealth and power. You are being conditioned to condemn politics as petty and boring, thus granting all more control to the powers that be. You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. The choice is yours." The band even took part in the Rock the Vote campaign, but that wasn't without controversy. During a show at Rosie's in Chapel Hill, the Orange County Board of Elections informed the event organizer that voter registration couldn't happen at the band's show, as registration could only happen, and I'm not joking, in a peaceful and quiet environment. Now, you may be wondering where all these political leanings came from. Well, Mullen told the Orlando Sentinel that his political leanings were informed by his parents, who he referred to as big-time hippie activists. His mom thought at one point that their phone was being bugged by the FBI because she worked as a psychologist who worked with what he referred to as a lot of undesirable people. But unlike so many celebrities in today's culture who think that their voices will amount to change, Mullen didn't think that was necessarily the case, adding to the Sentinel, "I'm not sure music is the greatest platform for politics, but in the end, we have to express how we feel, no matter how futile we might think our actions might be." But their politics didn't just cause controversy, it also landed the band in danger. They spoke to the Seattle publication The Rocket about how they had been shot at. Both Mullen and bassist Mike Dean had also been stabbed, with The Rocket adding, on more than one occasion they were attacked by rednecks, only to be arrested by unsympathetic cops for assaulting their antagonists. However, after recording their next album, Deliverance, they did exact their own form of justice. During the mixing sessions in LA, their practice space in Raleigh was burglarized. The band figured out who was behind it, with Mullen telling The Rocket, "It was one of the lost scenes from Deliverance. We ended up taking him to the woods and duct taping him to a tree. We threatened to leave him there." The group ended up getting their possessions back. Now, politics aside, the band, as you can imagine, also faced some backlash from longtime fans due to their more metal sound on Blind. Agel recalled, "There was definitely some blowback, but at the time we kind of knew we were onto something. I was trying to find my identity vocally, and just also who I was and what I was into. But I also loved Black Flag and the Bad Brains, Discharge and Circle Jerks. It wasn't a contest for me, it was just like finding the best impulses." Now, apart from the blowback from longtime fans and criticism they faced from their critics, Blind was a modest success, peaking at number 24 on the Heat Seekers chart. One of the singles, Dance of the Dead, saw regular radio play on popular stations like Los Angeles' KNAC, and it also got some play on MTV's Headbangers Ball. Soon enough, Beavis and Butthead were singing the band's praises, giving their approval to the band's video for Dance of the Dead.
Drums, guitars, and death. They finally got it right. Yeah.
The members could feel like things were finally moving in the right direction. As part of the tour for Blind, the band even hooked up with Danzig and Soundgarden. Keenan told Loudersound, Danzig was very supportive of what we were doing. It made us realize we were on the right track. We weren't just playing these dodgy little hardcore venues. We were pushing on and really making our name. It was an incredibly creative time, and we knew we needed to be a part of it. But prior to commencing work on what would be their follow-up record, the band was about to undergo another big lineup change. Bassist Phil Swisher and frontman Carl Agell left in 1993. Mullen told an interviewer, "To me, there's no point in trying to piece together what doesn't fit. Just call it musical differences. It all came down to Carl did not see eye to eye on us, on where the band was going, and Phil wasn't going to be in a band without Carl." Pepper added, "When it came time to sing, it didn't seem like he had done the same amount of homework as we put into it." Swisher and Agell soon formed the group Leadfoot. While the band auditioned a handful of new singers, it was Keenan's performance on Vote with a Bullet that convinced his bandmates that he should front the group. With Keenan leading the band now, the first song they came up with was Migraine, followed by Albatross. As Keenan told Loudersound, after that, everything fell together. Keenan, though, didn't really consider himself to be a gifted vocalist, but he did state, "I don't consider myself a great singer, but I can definitely get my point across. I'm more akin to Neil Young's school of singing. He's not really a great singer either, but he can tell a great story." By the dawn of the 90s, Corrosion of Conformity had transformed into something entirely different. Despite losing two key members, the band's original bassist Mike Dean returned to the fold after spending some time in the jungle. He had heard the demo for the song Clean My Wounds and was excited by the material the band was working on. The band was pretty broke during this period that they were recording their follow-up to Blind. Keenan was crashing at a friend's house, sleeping on the couch, just carrying his guitar and a bank card. But it was this space that proved the inspiration to create the music that formed the basis for their next album. He remarked, "Living like that makes you observe things besides CNN." In addition to abandoning their old sound, the band was also toning down their political material going forward. Pepper told the Associated Press, "I write about things I can see or touch. I've never been one to write about atrocities in South Africa or something because it doesn't really affect me." But they still had a little bit of a political bent, with Mullen writing the song Pearls Before Swine, which was about a Jewish journalist who stumbles upon Hitler's plans and warns the League of Nations, who doesn't take him seriously. I do want to point out there was an interesting piece written about the band and their merchandise in 1993. So apparently Corrosion of Conformity were said to have been making most of their money around this time off of their merch sales, with them taking about $15 out of every $25 shirt. It was estimated by 1993 they'd sold about 1 million shirts and about 250,000 albums. By this point in their career, the band was pretty unhappy with their label Relativity, who were now transitioning to signing more hip-hop acts. The members didn't feel like a priority anymore and wanted out of their contract, but Relativity said no. Then a tape of the music that the band had been working on made its way to somebody at Columbia Records who loved it. Columbia soon talked to Relativity about buying the group's contract, but the label said no. Then something strange happened. Columbia bought Relativity shortly after, and it was insinuated by the band members themselves that Corrosion of Conformity was the sole reason Columbia made the move. Deliverance was issued in September of '94 and gave the band their first taste of radio success. Clean My Wounds peaked at number 19 on the mainstream rock tracks chart and also appeared on the soundtrack for Tekken the Motion Picture. Albatross was also issued as a single and peaked at the same position. Keenan looked back on the album telling Loudersound, "We'd moved from that hardcore scene. We'd already written the song Albatross and already had this Skinner thing going on. The truth is we were determined to become a different type of band." The band got some better tours and shows playing with Metallica at the Monsters of Rock Festival in 1995, with Pepper adding, "We'd gone from being these broke musicians with no sort of future to having James Hetfield coming up, as he did, and slapping me on the back saying, 'Hey man, great album.'" The band got some more publicity in 1994, appearing on the Clerks movie soundtrack with the song Big Problems. Deliverance ended up going gold, selling about 500,000 copies. Given the response to Deliverance, Columbia Records saw Corrosion of Conformity's follow-up album as having significant potential, and they were hoping that it could be the global breakthrough they needed. While writing music for their next album, Keenan crashed at a halfway house for ex-cons in Raleigh for 2 months where he wrote a lot of the album. He was paying something in the order of $75 a month for a room that had nothing more than a radio, a 2-channel television, and a poster of Black Sabbath. It was at this halfway house that the name for their next album, Wise Blood, was born. According to Keenan, he was writing lyrics on pieces of paper that he would tack onto the wall, just one-liners, so his wall would be full of different lyrics. His roommates didn't know what he did for a living and thought that he was some sort of disgruntled postman or something like that, and so they called him Wise Blood. The record was recorded during Mardi Gras in New Orleans at Kingsway Studio. For Keenan and Weatherman, they would admit to playing old ratty guitars instead of new equipment. The decision was deliberate, with Keenan admitting to the plain dealer, "I think the less you have between your hands and the speaker, the better. We always try and make things really natural without technology as a crutch." It was during the mixing process in New York that the band were sharing a space with Metallica, who they started to hang out with a lot more at a nearby bar. Metallica frontman James Hetfield even lent his voice to the song Man or Ash, and the band even offered Corrosion of Conformity the chance to open for them for nearly 3 years on the road when they were promoting Load. Keenan recalled about Wise Blood, "It was a strong record, man. It's still one of my favorites, and the way it sounds is pretty brutal as well." Keenan told the same publication that when the band handed in the album to the label, the well-known track Drowning in a Daydream hadn't been written yet. So the president of Columbia at the time, Don Einer, listened to the album and said he didn't hear anything that could be a hit single, which Keenan thought was a strange reaction given the album's intentionally abrasive style. Einer even pushed the band to write a commercial song with a professional songwriter, similar to those who worked with bands like Aerosmith. The band refused, deciding that instead, they could prove that they could write their own hit song on their own terms. After the label pushed them to write a potential hit, the band quickly put together Drowning in a Daydream in a matter of days and added it to the album. Even with the new track, the label president still wasn't convinced it would be successful. Ironically, the president's secretary submitted the song for Grammy consideration without telling anyone, and it ended up getting nominated and receiving a lot of radio airplay. The song was the only single from the album to chart, peaking at number 27 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. Wise Blood would end up being issued on October 15, 1996, and it was a darker, more confident, and heavier record. Keenan reflected back on the album saying, the record was too harsh, didn't have a hit, we wrote a hit. We got nominated for a Grammy, and then Hetfield offers us a 3-year tour with Metallica. Everything they were seeing referring to the label was wrong. It was bizarre. They were like, what do you mean you've got a 3-year tour with Metallica? They were trying to kill it because they didn't like the record. While on the surface, it seemed like the band were doing well. In fact, their videos were on MTV, they were landing tours with Metallica, and they were finally getting the recognition they'd worked hard for. But the music business is a very fickle industry, and momentum can be a very fragile thing. The momentum from Wise Blood should have set them up for a decade of success, but instead it became the first step in a long, slow decline. The first sign of trouble, and one that always matters most to the Suits, was the sales figures. Despite all the critical acclaim and the high-profile tours, Wise Blood just didn't sell what Columbia Records had projected, and it sold less than Deliverance, peaking at number 104 on the American chart. For a major label, that wasn't enough. The band's complex, southern heavy sound was a tough sell in a world that was moving towards the more direct approach of nu metal. Almost as quickly as they were championed, Corrosion of Conformity found themselves on the outside looking in. Not long after the Wise Blood tour, Columbia Records dropped them. In the 90s music industry, that was often a death sentence. The band was left stranded. Keenan told IndieWeek that while Columbia Records gave them a lot of freedom, they fell victim to the way the industry worked, recalling, "Our flavor was done. Green Day was killing bands like us. We didn't have what they wanted." The group eventually signed a new deal with Sanctuary Records, who had recently moved to Raleigh, and the band became the label's flagship group. They issued their next album in 2000, America's Volume Dealer. The album was the first where the band actually used Pro Tools, as the previous records were recorded using analog. Producer John Custer claimed that using Pro Tools was a mistake looking back, recalling the format hadn't really graduated to the point that it was something that was reliable enough to where you could get analog qualities on digital. Keenan, looking back at America's Volume Dealer, described it as the most challenging album for the band, with some internal tension starting to show. While he stayed close with Woody and Mike, he noticed the group was pulling in different directions musically. Some tracks ended up softer than what he preferred, while he pushed for more heavier, more southern influenced songs. Keenan specifically believed that Stare Too Long could have been a big radio hit, especially since he brought in Warren Haynes from the Allman Brothers for a guest guitar spot, something unusual for their scene. But their record label didn't know what to do with the song, and it seemed like they dropped the ball on the album. The single, Congratulations Song, ended up peaking at number 24 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. At the end of the day, the album failed to make a commercial dent. The industry changed and Corrosion of Conformity was caught in the middle. At the same time, internal pressures were building up. Keenan had a side project going on, a supergroup called Down with the members of Pantera and Crowbar, and as the 2000s rolled on, Down started demanding more and more of his time and energy. Then in 2001, founding drummer Reed Mullen had to leave the band because of a back injury that resulted in him getting hooked on pills, and he was starting really not to dig the new sound the band was going for. The band kept pushing forward, though, even bringing in Stanton Moore from the funk band Galactic to drum on their 2005 album, In the Arms of God. But after that album's tour, the band went on a long hiatus, and Keenan shifted his full focus to Down. Add to that Hurricane Katrina happening, and given that Keenan was from New Orleans, he was also tending to that as well. From 2006 on, the version of Corrosion of Conformity that recorded Wise Blood, as well as Deliverance, was effectively gone. But the story doesn't end there. In a move that really speaks to their refusal to quit, the band's story took another twist. In 2010, the earlier lineup from their hardcore days, Woody Weatherman, Mike Dean, and a returning Reed Mullen, reformed as a power trio. This version of the band reconnected with their punk and thrash roots, releasing 2 albums that were raw, aggressive, and celebrated by longtime fans. But for many, that sludgy southern magic that Keenan brought to the table was missing. The band had survived, but they were fractured and the path to the top seemed more uncertain than ever. For years, it did seem like the Wise Blood lineup was just a chapter in a history book. Keenan was focused on Down, and Corrosion of Conformity trio was doing its own thing. But behind the scenes, the 4 members started talking. Then in late 2014, the announcement finally came. Pepper Keenan was officially rejoining the band. According to interviews, this wasn't some big business move. It started organically. Drummer Reed Mullen mentioned that he and Pepper had been talking about old demo tapes and forgotten riffs from the 90s. There was a feeling of unfinished business. Bassist Mike Dean explained that the first plan was just to tour the classic material and see if the chemistry was still there. And as Keenan put it, they tested that and it tested positive. The fan response was immediate and overwhelming. What started as a reunion tour quickly turned into a full-on creative rebirth. They went back into the studio with producer John Custer, the same guy who produced Deliverance and Wise Blood, and the result, released in January of 2018, was No Cross, No Crown. This was the first album from that classic lineup in 18 years, and it sounded like they never stopped. The album was met with incredible reviews, but more importantly, it connected with the fans. No Cross, No Crown also debuted at number 67 on the Billboard 200 chart. It was the highest chart position the band had ever achieved in their entire career. After being dropped, fracturing, and spending years in the commercial wilderness, Corrosion of Conformity was more successful than they'd ever been. But their story was also marked by tragedy. In January of 2020, founding drummer Reed Mullen passed away. His death was a devastating blow and the end of an era. Then in September of 2024, founding bassist Mike Dean announced that he was amicably leaving the band, citing the difficulty of collaborating long distance and the impact of Mullen's passing. But where most bands would have called it quits, Corrosion of Conformity announced they were carrying on with former Down guitarist Bobby Landgraf on bass and Stanton Moore returning on drums for a new album planned for 2025. So in the end, the story of Corrosion of Conformity isn't about chasing trends or conquering the mainstream. It's the story of a band that survived by simply refusing to be anything other than themselves. They survived being dropped by a major label at their creative peak. They survived lineup changes, long hiatuses, and heartbreaking loss. and they came back stronger, achieving their greatest commercial success more than 2 decades after their supposed prime. They didn't just survive the 90s, they outlasted it. They outlasted their friends, they outlasted the trends, the labels, and all the expectations. They are the true underdog champions, and the book of Corrosion of Conformity is definitely not finished. That brings us to the end of today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in Rock Roll True Stories. Take care.